Okay.
You need to wire up first.
Well, all right. Put on the button.
Okay. Namaste.
Namaste. In Nevada.
You can't tell by the flowers. I guess it's going to be 20 degrees tonight. So.
Yeah,
A reminder. For every spring, it's always good to remember that spring leads to another winter. And step out, and step out view. That allows for the clinging. All right, so welcome. It's our post 9-day, first post 9-day. I noticed a number of survivors in the room.
Survived.
Yes, so perhaps not. And is a perhaps the most powerful program, and I think the last one we did was so it just allows me to reconnect to my roots, and for all of us to reconnect to the source of ourselves. And in 2-hour sittings, 2-hour sittings, 2 hours. So it's this intense immersion into that essential quality of ourself. And it's purify, we empty out, we shed the habitual momentum of our lives for a period of time, because then we build it all back up. It's what the ego does. It can't help itself. It keeps busy all the time. So what about that? And what about that? And what about that? Now you thought you were free, but what about this? And what about that? But it it brought many layers of for me, insights, revelations, the nature of the unfolding of the work that we're doing, and it's into I could say an expanded paradigm. You can never catch where I'm not expanding. Is that it's always expanding, but that was one other expansion. And part of what happens in the expanding paradigm is you're more subject to the fray of the human collective consciousness. There's more consequences that occur. You're in the line of fire. The more you see a standard or an opportunity and seek to step into it. But I read a very important article that was new. Something because we every stage going to be subjecting yourself to being once again in a survivor of. You're going to come out of the trenches of the life as you've known it and expose yourself into arenas that you're not yet aware enough or experienced enough. So it's always going to be like this. And what is it that stops us from choosing to expand? Well, it's fear. The habit of it's not safe, or I'm not good enough, or all the trauma. Those are the real cords that keep pulling us back into the falsehood, out of the truth, stopping the potentiality that the truth brings into our lives. Because the tail end of the 9 days has all 9 days, is how do we bring this opportunity into our life? Well, what is it? What are the chords? What are some of the chords? We know that some of them are positions and orientations and structures of beliefs and opinions and all the rest of it, trauma, stories that we've created for ourselves and the world. And there is this underlying principle behind all of that. So I thought I'd share that article, or parts of it, tonight as an opportunity. What I'd like to address tonight is an article in the New York Times, An Era Defined by Fear. Tone underneath the political environment. Another synagogue shooting, another day of shock, another lonely fanatic, another crusade of insecurity and fear. It's good to see the exaggeration of the consequences of fear, to be able to access that match that we may carry within ourselves. I wonder if we fully grasp the emotional tone for our politics. When historians define this era, they may well see it is above all else a time defined by fear. So this is an opportunity to see, as we look outward, for taking unfair advantages of their power or distorting, is this paradigm of fear, which is being fed unwittingly by the natural inclination of ego to seek the risk, to seek the danger, so that it can feel it can handle its world, it can be in control. He's saying here, he believes the era started in September 11th, 2001, with the two towers being destroyed. It was like the enemy for the first time, whoever been the enemy previously, was able to strike us in our homeland, even though we're surrounded by oceans and vast landmass. It was like a child being caught in a house when it's... So it was a waking up. This is a waking up opportunity. But what it became was a structure by which fear could infuse into society at levels and ways it had never done before. I remember before 9/11 coming into LA airport from India, and people were coming and going in their tennis shoes and their t-shirts. There was no security lines, and I have all the other countries I had traveled. It was like that. You were free. It was this sense of okay, I'm just coming home, and how different it became, how congested and contracted it became, reminding us continuously, as if a remembrance of that moment, throwing us back into the trauma, is why we're standing in the TSA line or the regular boarding lines. It's an inconvenience, but it's really a reflection of an adaptation to trauma that is keeping the trauma in place. They have the terrorists, whose purpose is to create terror, had succeeded. And now we don't need other terrorists. We have an entire media and political system that's constantly putting us into terror, into trauma. This is the predicament we find ourselves in. Now, the advantage of fear is it wakes us up to that which we didn't know we needed to be woken up to. That's why the body knows pain. The purpose of pain is to wake the body up so it can survive more effectively. That's its purpose. So we can avoid pain in the future, avoid are being killed or diminished or demeaned. So it has a role to play, and fear does thereby has a possible role, but it's also a defining thereby has a possible role, but it's also a defining of a process of waking up, as if you're entering into another domain you hadn't had to enter into before. That the old structures that made you feel comfortable and safe are no longer adequate. Or the structures that had kept you in your old consciousness no longer can hold up as you enter into the new consciousness. So this inherited pattern that is wired up into our nervous system and our DNA becomes a significant obstacle as we unfold as human beings in our own awakening process. I can't tell you, at least 25% of people who have had awakenings, if not much more, 40% perhaps is more accurate, had fear as a component with their awakening. That's those who could actually open up and feel that they were lifted up and enhanced out of the awakening is not universal. So it's very much true in all the unfolding of the nature of what we are as we come into existence outside of the boundary of what we've known before. So it's natural, it's not wrong, it's just good to recognize if in any one situation you're finding yourself contracted, when you're finding yourself in a strategy of protection, when you're finding yourself in the other strategy around fear is reactivity, which is aggressive protections. And with that reactivity is a judgment, opinions, belief, righteousness, between this and that. Always, and if allowed to go, everywhere it looks, it finds enemies to justify its position, its opinion, its belief. So this is an impossible structure to work at within the structures in which fear enable. And that includes our minds. It includes past emotional adaptations from our human life. It includes the stories we created about what's safe and not safe, what we need to feel safe versus what we need to be safe. There is a loss of being able to get in touch with the actual reasonable necessities, requirements of life if fear is the organizing principle and all its adjuncts, minds, emotions, reactivities, positions, strategies, righteousness, justifications, or rationalizations. About this article, because this is New York Times and it has a very broad base for the most part, is that it's a reflecting of something that we, in our work, is looking always to address when it rises up, when we find ourselves in a position, find ourselves in a reaction, find ourselves feeling dread or awful or contracted as evidence of the possible attack. And what we do. Well, the structure of fear, of course, is foundational in I am powerless to protect myself. I'm powerless to make sure I can survive this moment. I am my very design built into our nervous system. Thereby, it has this convincing reality. When the mind, which is the instrument of the protective structure of the fear design, will focus on that to see how you can be safe, how you can keep that in control. Therefore, anytime you hear anything in the news, anytime anybody says anything that triggers, it has a greater impact than things that are not threatening, like happy stories, where people do good, where people are helping the world. Inspiration initially is not equal to the power of fear. Even aspiration is not initially equal to the power of fear to grab hold of us viscerally and keep us obsessing in that structure. associated with fear, of course, is need, what you feel you need, and the possibility of losing the thing you have that has protected you or kept you safe or kept you secure or feeling comfortable. It's good to just kind of touch on this, poke into the design. When you step out of the 9-day, you get this big, vast perspective. And then to bring it down into what you are in relationship to that vastness, self-absorbed, petty, shallow, unexamined structures of preferences and reactivities and obscurities and resistances that you are, that are still defining the nature of who you are, what instead of the what you are. And we know that who has to get enlightened is the who. The what is already knows what's going on. But if we're identified with the who, forget the what, it's not relevant. Yet in the long run, knowing what you are actually gives you greater authority of that part of the who you are that's locked into that absorption and that addiction to the impact of the unknown or the fear or the reactivity. It has more power in the long term. It's like gravity. It's called a weak force. It defines the entire universe, but appears weak next to the other electromagnetic forces. So it is true with the nature of what we are. As the truth is a greater authority, but it doesn't have the same convincing reality from our human identity. Making aspiration, what we aspire for, what we long for, what we're inspired by, as greater than our contracted adaptation to fear, is the battle. It's the battlefield. Okay, let's see. It has been an era where politicians rise by stroking fear. Donald Trump declared an American carnage and made it to the White House by warning of an immigrant crime wave that doesn't exist. Fear also comes up from below in the form of childhood trauma and insecurity. It sometimes seems as if half of America's children grow up in strained families and suffer, a term I haven't heard before, adverse childhood experiences. Like label something as if it's new. But we're really labeling probably what we all have gone through, adverse childhood experiences, right? So it means almost part of their life as having been an adverse childhood experience. So you get, congratulations, you've got a new condition that can justify your incapacities and rationalize why you behave so poorly. And the other half grow up in overprotective families and emerge into adulthood unready to face the risks that will inevitably come. No preparation, no immunities, no inoculation, no anything. You're coming out of the cocoon fully grown with no readiness to deal with actually coming into life, with how life actually is. This is actually not meant to be the happy place. Heaven's the happy place. This is the unhappy place. They called it hell, but it's not necessarily hell. It's really an attitudinal orientation that you take. You could be in hell and it could be heaven. You could be in heaven, it could be hell if you got the wrong attitude for the situation. So what is it that's an attitude? What is it that brings a perspective that attitude has? What is it? Is the point of view or the perspective of the attitude? Well, it's going to be shaped by fear unless something truer has come to you. So we're reshaping our ability to experience life in a way other than fear-based, truth-based, possibility-based, actualization-based. Depression rates rise. Depression rates rise. Safe spaces proliferate. That's an interesting thing. So if you come into life and you're not prepared, then what are you going to do? You're going to retreat to a safe space. People who are like you, people who believe like you, believe is the same sex as you, believe who goes to this community or that community, who are from one country or another country. We're going to seek safety in separation with others. Collegiate mental health systems are being overwhelmed. Then we talk about the media, which I think is a good point. Everybody is now a broadcast journalist. Everybody's got an opinion, and he wants to make the whole, or she wants the whole world to know. It's looking to establish these zones where it can create its own identity. Some of them are an inclusionary structure, some are exclusionary. And the exclusion, the advantage of you feeling special. It's us against the immigrants. You know, the black man against the white man against the black man. It's the women against men, or men against women. It's that position where you go and you reinforce the fear structure and you make it into not just your identity, but who you live with, who you listen to, what you believe, what confirms what you already are, even if it's an error. You know, it's all Maya. Another lesson in Maya. But it's very good to see New York Times trying to address the issue. The sure way to win in the media game is to racket up the crisis atmosphere. All news is breaking news. Convert any news into the news that will feed into your audience, your listening, and the listening you're building. And we're talking about millions and millions of people using their Facebook page or their YouTube page or their broadcasts, broadcasts, all this as a means of reinforcing this separating. It's not just who's listening to the liberal media or who's listening to the conservative media. It's now everywhere. House of Babel, 1,000 languages. Nobody knows anymore because they're not sharing a common language any longer. They only know those who speak their own language. Yet, since World War II, there has been this incredible movement towards a one-world language, to a one-world political system. And now what we're encountering is the rebellion against that. And also the consequences of that when you're coming from a paradigm of less trying to be more, or fear, or need, or want, or desire. It's also fed by the fact that we're disconnected from the necessities of physical life. We no longer have to grow our own food and hope for the favorable seasons. We no longer have to wash our own dishes. We just put them in the dishwasher. There's so many things that are now so handled for us that we're no longer in the grounded reality of cause and effect. And this is the thing that is allowing us to live in this virtual world with no basis in matter. Our economic system has long forgotten that gold was once the basis. We no longer have that, and we may not, as long as this civilization lasts, ever find a basis other than agreement. Why money means anything? This is significant. It's only the agreement that keeps something in existence. That's actually in the domain of consciousness truth. Even gold is only an agreement. You know? And if we wanted to have equality brought back into, we'll convert dirt into being more valuable than gold. And then everybody can get rich. When we get to the point where the fear itself begins to take control, fear generates fear. Everyone feels besieged. Power is somehow elsewhere, with the malevolent forces who are somewhere out there who are willing to stop at nothing. Fear puts a dark filter over everything. The fearful person is unable to hear good You can't fill a cup that's already full, no matter what goes into it, unless it's a line. Yes, okay, messed up there. While any possible threat looms large, we are in the middle of one of the longest economic booms in our history, with wages finally rising again for the middle class. But nobody feels that because of the sense that it's all about to come crashing down. You know, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Fear runs ahead of the facts and inflames the imagination. 90% of the time, we're not afraid of what's happening to us, but of some catastrophe our imagination tells us might happen. So it's imaginary. Fear makes everything amorphous. But for those in the grip of fear, immigration or globalization, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, or automation are all shapeless, insidious forces that are out of control. The inevitable reaction is overreaction. Fear strokes anger, which then strokes more fear. Anger is the child of fear. Quotes a book called The Monarchy of Fear. The fearful person turns asocial, rejects any compassionate response to social problems, and instead lashes out. Fear indeed is immensely narcissistic. It drives out all thoughts of others. The fearful person doesn't see particular individuals, just hateful shades who arouse disgust, repulsion, and can be blamed. Republicans are disgusting. The irrationalities of disgust underlies many social evils or repulsion. Anyway, he goes on, and I don't think we need to take this more into the room than we have. But I believe that it's always good to recognize what is the nature of our predicament is not so much what's happening now in our lives, but with a projection that comes from a false basis into the situation you're in or the opportunities that arise. Because the fear is still a defining, organizing principle of your consciousness, then when opportunities arise, you won't even want to see them, or if you see them, you'll see them as threats. So we can't do this work if that is still the running paradigm. Even when you awaken, even when you have higher experiences, when you rubber band back into your old personality, and that structure is still adamant, you're not going to see anything else but what that perspective allows you to see. It'll tell you that that higher state, awakened state, was a lie, was a falsehood, and that what you're experiencing now is the reality. Yeah, we're pretty soon here. So, the other side of the story. The book my teacher wrote called Manifesting Divine. Shiratmananda wrote the book Manifesting Divine, and for those of you who are trying to figure out what I'm talking about with this mighty purpose, I invite you to download this from Amazon. My teacher might speak with a strong accent, but he writes brilliantly and clearly. This came up for the first time in 2001 when I was with him. It was the beginning of the LA program. He'd already sent me to Sri Lanka to throw the coconut into the ocean as the launch of the world work, and this was one of the consequences of that work. He reached out into America, and he created this whole 6-month program for the advanced course of the Bhagavad Gita. It was during that course that he began, many of these transcriptions came from, and then compiled into 2019, 18 years ago, what I'm speaking. To make a collective decision about our role in changing the consciousness on Earth. That's how he started the talk. To make a decision about our role in the changing consciousness on the planet, where he was speaking right off the bat to our authority. And if you notice the nature of truth, written truth, it's always calling us up to the opportunity to be in existence in a way that we haven't realized we had the choice to do. And it's my observation, and I can take any one piece of this and go on for an entire program, but it is that ability to choose something other than what we're habituated to that we bring forward truth consciousness, or certainly the opportunity, a greater opportunity for truth consciousness. Even as human beings, as we develop in human beings and we desire this and desire that, strive to get those things that we want, strive to find the things that we wanted to be and to be able to learn how to be those things, we are engaged in a process of coming to greater truth with who we are in existence. Our ability to have done that also empowers us to continue to do that when we wake up to what we are. And what the what can do in the opportunity. Sri Aurobindo was really good at calling us up. The Mother Book was calling us up. But here he was, we both had this inclination. I was looking how to bring it down. For about 3 years, he pulled away from that so much, didn't speak of it so much. But recently, in the last 2 years, instead of this tact, he started bringing the mantras, the ancient Vedic in the planet, so the planet could heal itself. Talking about what I talk about. Kind passes through a transition that involves a great constantly passing through such a transition. All souls at time of goes on nature of uncertainty rises up, confusion rises up, dejection rises up, negative thoughts, suicide, self-destruction starts rising up. This is the nature of the collective consciousness going through a dejection. Always, the dejection process is awakened, but we don't know it's awakened. The recognition, one that will create its own unique civilization and bring a totally new species. It's going to happen. He's speaking it from the state of the recognition that that is what's happening. Just like when I see someone in dejection, I smile because I know they're stepping out of their old box. So in the recognition of what's happening in the collective consciousness, it's the recognition that we're waking up. That these trauma, these fears, these things that happen that shock our systems are actually opportunities. They can be converted into a place where we go back into our contraction, maybe even further, or they can be a place where we stand up and come to greater authority in our lives. That's a direct correlation with what we're doing, what I see the opportunity of us awakened souls to do in the collective consciousness, and our own unfolding coming out of our habitual patterns of being. Let me see where I want to go with this. The root of this problem lies in the evolutionary process itself. I found that was an important statement. That there are currents and cycles that are much bigger than our individual cycles. There are currents and cycles that's much bigger than the historical cycles that we've been able to see, although we can clearly see parallels between this time and the time before World War II. where the conservative, nationalistic, isolationistic attitude was spreading throughout the whole planet. It was spreading throughout the whole planet. It's spreading throughout the whole planet now. Democracy no longer has the authority it had before. And this is a cycle. And if you can look back to the 1930s, you'll see clear evidence of very similar conditions arising back then as we see now. The only difference this era is there won't be war. Rather, it'll be an inability of mankind meeting the challenge of climate change. The inability of mankind to meet the battle of the consequences of civilization that we're now living in. So it is a bigger war requiring a completely different paradigm by which we look for solutions, or we look to even fully understand the problems. I can say now versus back here when he was writing this in 2001, the problem is clear, and therefore the solution, the problem is clear, and therefore the solutions are more apparent. The challenges are implementing the solutions. And that's where we are now. So we're in actually the place where the solutions lie. The challenge is it's not, the solutions are not being applied. They're not being applied at the level they have to be applied. Which in one case I heard it's the next 12 years, another case I heard the next 30 years. That if we are not stepping forward and implementing these solutions as a collective species, that this is going to allow for a momentum to continue past the point of no return. So what this is nature, or the creation, taking mankind into another spiral, awakening us, requiring us to awaken further than what we had to do in previous cycles. And whatever held in the past for solving the problem of that era is now what's in the way of solving the problem of this next era. You can't solve a problem from the state of consciousness that created the problem. So the unfolding that's occurring in the society right now is very much reflective of these universal trends. So who among us are qualified? Who among us actually can make the difference that Sri Atmananda and myself is talking about it? And it is the awakened souls. But not just every awakened soul. He says, I am reaching out to the hearts and minds of those human beings whose consciousness has evolved to such a height that no longer are they interested in their own individual progress or liberation, but are now thinking of the emancipation of humanity. My call is to those who are able to feel the universal in them, along with their individual spirit. The ability to come out of the contracted consciousness, not that you are dismissing it or avoiding it, because that won't serve. That'll limit your ability to serve the universal. But by having a larger purpose than your own relief or your own freedom or your own comfort or security or your own healing. So the bar is higher. And therefore, someone who's still trying to come out of a contracted fear structure, still caught up in the self-absorption of the traumas of their life, it's very hard to open up to these universal unless there was something universal in you that you brought with you this life. That sense of a purpose greater than yourself. And then all you did this life was look for that purpose greater than yourself. And it's not right or wrong. Much of my work is about individual awakening. 70–80% of it is about bringing people to their truth of who they are. The foundations of my teachings are drawn on the Bhagavad Gita, and the first 6 chapters of the Gita address the core issues of coming out of who we are into what we are. When we come out of that, then we enter into the 7th, 8th, 9th chapters. That's when we universalize. That's when we're capable of coming out of the domination, of the adaptions of our upbringing and our culture and our life and our orientation. So it's going to be these people that this message is relevant for, where you can actually get to a place where you can be useful. And then it's about awakening or becoming liberated so that you can be of greater service to the opportunity of mankind. That you can find a part to play in the implementation of the solutions of the collective condition. And it's not like we go out there and do the implementation, but it is an intent that we bring collectively that wakens in people their own capacity in whatever position they are in to implement. So the 16-year-old girl in Sweden and not going to school on Fridays, that came from a prompting that the new generations are in touch with, that are letting them be aware of the peril that is required for us to wake up to our purpose. So this pointing to the peril isn't to make doom and gloom. It's pointing to the peril of calling us up into a higher responsibility. To achieve this, we need the active participation of hardly 1% of the total population of Earth. Now that's no small number, 78 million people. If 78 million people on the planet are actively working to implement the solutions to the peril, to the problem, that will be sufficient to correct or to move into this condition of consciousness that is now coming, that is inviting mankind to be a different kind of species. Maybe we breathe carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. So maybe we need a new kind of species. We become part of the solution. Let's get a biological redesign in the chemistry of our bodies, and so we need carbon dioxide to live, and then we exhale oxygen. But the principle of a new species is not so much in matter, but in the quality of the consciousness that takes us out of this narrow fear, need, bias of our positions and our attitude and the trauma and the development of us that comes, that we inherited, that we brought with us, into another paradigm of existing. I know we're trying to do this. I know why parents are being helicopter parents, because the children that are coming are so much brighter, they're so much truer, they're so much intuitively connected to the purpose of life, that the parents are trying to preserve and protect the opportunity for them to manifest from whatever degree of consciousness they have. So there too, by raising such children, are trying to create a more ideal circumstance so that they perhaps can enlighten the world through their brightness and be able to come out of the usual paradigm, the self-serving paradigm that we've all inherited and taken on. And it's possible now. It's possible to use the resources of this planet and distribute it in some level of material requirements of life and put their focus on the development of themselves and consciousness. And in that way, awaken a new paradigm, a new kind of world for ourselves that is no longer bound as this one has been. We don't know what that is. Right? We did the 9 day, we didn't know what you were going to get. By the end of the 9 day, it was miracles happening all the time. What happened? What is it? This miracle creation. I called it alchemy. It was this turning something that was gross into something refined in matter. You took something that looked untrue and it became a true. And in the process, you discovered yourself as a different species than you knew yourself before. Now, I don't know how long that's held on. You know, it's really hard for the mind to hang on to these things because the mind's designed for a different purpose. Rather, it has to be something we live and continuously are putting ourselves into remembrance about. Now, my teacher was really interesting because very psychically alert, much more than I am. And he was able to see mathematical combinations, and apparently there are Vedic traditions that have the ratios of the yugas and the percentage of sattva in each of the yugas and the different phases of the yugas. This is in the Gita, where it talks about the 1,000 days of night, and 1,000 yugas where Brahma sleeps, and 1,000 yugas where he comes awake. It is this vast cycle, and from that is this whole mathematical formula that permeates every part of the Vedic teachings and healing practices, from Vedic astrology to, the healing arts and medicine. So he had all these mathematical structures that were talking about where we are and the unfolding out of this particular cycle called Kali Yuga, where it's the ignorance is the most profound of all the 4 cycles. There's the Satya Yuga, the Treta Yuga, the Dvapada Yuga, and the Kali Yuga. The Satya Yuga is 100% sattva. The Treta Yuga is 75% sattva. Dvapada, which is where the Gita was written during Dvapada, was a 50% sattva. And we're in the Kali, which is 25% sattva, however, at best. At the time he was making this revelation, he says, we're hovering right around 15%. Now what happens at 25% is the unfolding of the Dharma, the opportunity of that era, is able to go smoothly. If it drops below that 25%, it starts faltering. It starts failing in its ability. Now the Kali Yuga is where the tire meets the road. The Kali Yuga is all about matter. All the other yugas are about all the subtle worlds and all the subtle planes. So they can traverse between the material world up into this plane. So they didn't need to change the material world, because to communicate, to fly, to travel to other places, to communicate, to know things, all they had to do was ascend into the subtle worlds. So when there's a saturation of sattva, that's also what happens to an awakened consciousness. But in this domain, it was about converting matter into spirit. So this is really where all the yugas end up, and this is where the work needs to be done, or the opportunity of the work needs to be done.
Time check.
Time check. The period of mutual annihilation is over. War is over. War will no longer be the means by which mankind creates its own suffering. Good news and bad news with that.
We got something better now.
We got something better. The extinction of the human race. Well, we don't need wars anymore. We got the big bomb. We must strengthen this new force that has descended to the planet and bring mankind together. A harmony that was unthinkable in previous century has now required to become a reality now. Is now required to become a reality now. It will not come through war, a subjugation of others, nor through material advancement. It will come through the expansion of the human heart, expansion of the very universal in the individual, in man. So he's pointing to the heart. So what is it? The heart is 5,000 times more magnetic force associated with the heart. Yeah. It is a much greater intelligence than the mind. It's a teeny little mind based on fear and desire and survival and success. So in the heart, he's pointing to the part of us that can step out of itself into something larger, which I think is exactly what should be the nature of our relationship as we move into the truth of what we are, is to draw on our heart more, less on our mind or understanding. And it's the heart that actually does the healing. The intelligence can point you to what needs to be healed, but it's the heart that actually does the work. So when we, as a species, start opening our heart to each other, the solution will just flow naturally because the being lies in the heart. And the heart will bring us together in a way where the structures of mind and fear and separation would keeping us apart. Once it awakens, it will automatically march. In our own lifetimes, we will experience the bliss, the joy, the light of this new consciousness. Mm-hmm. There's much more. It's a whole book. So this is perhaps my new scripture for a while. As I keep expanding on the peril and the purpose, in terms of as we go forward, the advantage of these Tuesday nights, as these are the opportunity to communicate to many of you all over the world, this broader message. Those who are in the programs, we work on the problem at the core where we're the source of, but here we keep looking at where we're headed in the more bigger picture and what is the nature of this work with that. So what we have alchemy. Where did the alchemy come from? The transformative power of Sat Force, truth consciousness. That's the alchemy. This takes the little bit we can do and blows it up. It takes what we could naturally unfold over the course of multiple lives when we bring it into a few months, a few years with Satri. There's this acceleration where something that we didn't think was possible becomes possible. Something that we didn't know becomes seen, recognized. So this is the power of this work. This is the power of what we're all doing as part of this new Dharma and the structures, is to use this force as an enabling agent in the unfolding of that quality in us that can be part of the solution and no longer part of the problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have time? Yes. Just a few.
Just one.
Maybe
Okay.
one.
No, we're not doing a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great, what you're talking about. And the two things that you brought up are so related. The fear and who can meet the challenge of this. It seems that have to be awake people who are without fear.
Or fear no longer control.
Right.
It's not the authority.
Right.
Yeah.
So the specific question, I had fear come up really strong this week. I've been taking walks regularly in the woods. And then a few days ago, I was walking in the woods and suddenly I became afraid. My first thought was a bobcat, which I knew wasn't a very realistic fear, but
Fear was looking for something to feed on.
yeah. And then the fear came up, like, is there some... And then I questioned, is this fear or is this intuition? What do I do with this fear? How do I know if it's true? Because I have once avoided a horrific situation when fear arose and I started running, and at the point I looked back, I saw that I would have walked into a really bad situation. So the fear was there, and then I thought, I don't know the difference between fear and intuition. I don't know what to do now with this fear. And I thought, I'm not going to try to second guess it. So I'm just going to turn around and go back because I'm afraid now. And I could be attracting something with this. I didn't know.
That's another imagination.
Yeah, but okay. But so the question was how, when fear comes up, and fear is permeating our world right now, how do you deal with it in your own body? And I'll take my question off the seat.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good question.
That's a great question.
So if you look at the nature of fear, it will seek opportunities to fear. Fear is like a hungry beast. It needs to come up and feed. If there's nothing to fear, it will imagine something to fear. It will convert something it didn't fear into something to fear. So catching yourself fearing is catching your ego egoing. The difference between objective reality and imagination is more of a problem in this era than in any other era where you really had things to fear. In this place, the fear doesn't get enough to feed on. In this world of security and comfort and convenience, entitlement and indulgence, the fear is anxiety. It's existential stress because it knows it should be fearing, but it can't find anything to fear. So it looks to be afraid of something or looks to perceive a threat. I was noticing something today with me is that I was working out, and about every 15 minutes, this anger rose up while I was working out. And I was just had a lot of power, just came up like that. And it happened like 4 times. I was saying, wow, what is this that's coming up? And I recognized that it's anger, it was anger, but underneath it, very well, could be something at the subliminal level of the design of the human body that's looking to feed. Because what does fear do? Fear creates righteousness. Fear enhances, supports my separate existence. So if you don't have something to fear, it can be you'll get anxious about your own existence. So you need an enemy in order to come into existence, or thereby a friend, in order to be safe coming into existence. So I believe that we're dealing with a visceral, instinctive, structural design of the human system that's seeking to come into existence. Fear is seeking to come into existence. Okay. Now, what can also be fear? Fear can be something is trying to awaken in us and we don't know what it is yet. Fear could be a transition within the very core of our consciousness that's still subconscious, that's coming to the surface, where the system knows, oh, something's happening and I don't know what it is, and then it's looking for something to assign for that cause. So if I go look at what is the solution to fear, is to be with your fear. That means literally to stop. Do not take actions on its promptings. Breathe, because you consciously breathe, brings more authority, your true authority, back into yourself. Right. Breathe into what's going on, noticing what's going on in your body, experiencing that, and then continue on your way. Whatever you had set in motion before. When we take action based on the fear, we feed it. Even if we think that was the right action. It's very hard with a strong vital to take a distinction between our imagination and the mental design that looks for objects of fearing. Because the emotional body carries the trauma, the emotional body carries the complex weave of the Maya, where it makes things real that are unreal, and makes things that are real unreal. That's an emotional vital structure in us that has us imagine that what we think could create something from the thinking place. We can't create from the mind. We'll simply bring up another version of what we've already known. So it is the egocentricness of a little child trying to find a way of coming into existence, and the idea of it is don't think negative thoughts. Thinking negative thoughts will create the thing you're afraid of. In fact, there's a truth in that. Learning how to discard negative thoughts, if it really worked, would be helpful for a child. But if a child keeps generating the fear, even when you discard it, it comes back, or it dismisses your ability to discard it. Okay. So when we look into the unfolding of the nature as we go into the opportunity of the work that we're bringing, being able to sort out what is truth and untruth is not going to be just a mental process. It's going to be when our heart opens up to the capacity to directly experience the truth from this frequency. instead of from this frequency. And that's going to make all the difference. Because if you go into your heart, you'll say, oh, look at the trees. Look at the richness of the nature around here. You know, it would be moving back into relationship with existence. Because fear can only exist in separation. Once you go into relationship, it loses its authority. Some of the things about the nature of our implementation of the solution, this is the work. And each of us do this work, which is to discover the right action, the effective action, that can actually implement the solution of the problem of our expression of the collective consciousness, of the collective problem. We are 1/7.8 billionth of the problem. And when we discover that, we can be 1/7.8 billionth of the solution. But that's the extent of it. Once we become aware of ourselves and responsibility with our piece of the problem, we start becoming aligned with the purpose, and the purpose finds its expression through us. Its effectiveness thereby is greatly enhanced as we get out of the way, and it's able to bring itself into existence. So what did you do right now in this, Radha, when you came up and shared it? So by being willing to throw yourself out and share the structure of what you had, it isn't about being right or wrong. It's about to share the process of coming into relationship with existence so that others can use that as a basis for them to come into existence. What is that? That's manifestation. Every time we step out of our box willing to share something venerable, every time we step out of that place which says, no, it's not safe, don't share, we actually contribute to the unfolding of the opportunity of a place of being that is without fear, fearless. Suppose you knew you had nothing ever to fear. Suppose you knew you lived forever. Nothing could burn you, nothing could defeat you, nothing could stop that which you are. Would that not be fearless? Would that not be fully capable of coming into existence in whichever way is required in any one moment? That's the implementation of the solution.
There you go.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, namaste. Let us take a few minutes. We may be done with the broadcast, but we want to be able to have a little time together.
Ethan.
Yes, on Thursday we'll be at Ethan House. It'll be a meditation. Ethan Barn. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat.